The bruises on her wrist were faint, just shadows beneath the cuff of her sleeve, but Adrian Core saw them anyway. For 6 months, he had watched his secretary move through his penthouse office like a ghost, silent and careful, never meeting his eyes for more than a second. He had built an empire on reading people, on knowing when someone was hiding something valuable or dangerous. Lydia Hart was hiding both. The morning he reached across his desk and caught her hand before she could pull away, the carefully constructed distance between them shattered. She froze. He didn't let go. In that moment, she realized the most feared man in the city had been paying attention all along, and now there was nowhere left to hide. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below so I can see how far this story travels. Hit that like button and stay with me until the end. You won't regret it. The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Adrian Core's office on the 47th floor, turning the city below into a blur of neon and steel. Lydia Hart stood at the edge of his desk, tablet in hand, her posture perfect despite the exhaustion pressing down on her shoulders. She had been working for Adrian for 6 months, and in that time she had learned 3 critical rules: be efficient, be invisible, and never, ever make him wait. Revenue projections for the third quarter are up 8%, she said quietly, her voice steady despite the tension coiled in her chest. The acquisition in Singapore closed this morning. Legal wants your signature on the Warsaw contracts by end of day. Adrian didn't look up from the papers spread across his desk. His dark hair was pushed back carelessly, his jaw tight with concentration. He was wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people made in a year, the kind of tailored precision that made him look like he belonged in a museum, untouchable, carved from something harder than flesh. "Cancel my 4 o'clock," he said, his voice low and controlled. "Move it to tomorrow, same time." "Yes, Mr. Core." She made the note without hesitation, her fingers moving quickly across the screen. She had gotten good at anticipating him, at reading the small shifts in his mood that most people missed. It was a survival skill she had honed long before she ever walked into this building. "Anything else?" she asked. He glanced up then, just for a second, and she felt the weight of his gaze like a physical thing. Adrian Core had eyes the color of storm clouds, gray, unreadable, unsettling. People said a lot of things about him, that he was brilliant, that he was ruthless, that he had clawed his way out of nothing and built an empire on the bones of men who underestimated him. Lydia didn't know if all of it was true, but she knew enough to be careful. "That's all," he said. She nodded and turned toward the door, relieved to escape the suffocating quiet of his office. But before she could take more than 2 steps, his voice stopped her. "Lydia." She froze, her hand tightening on the tablet. He almost never used her first name. "Yes?" "Come here." Her pulse spiked, but she forced herself to turn around and walk back toward his desk. Adrian was watching her now, his full attention locked on her in a way that made her skin prickle. She stopped a few feet away, keeping the desk between them like a barrier. "Is something wrong?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, studying her with the kind of focus that made her feel like he could see straight through her carefully constructed armor. She resisted the urge to adjust her collar, to smooth down the sleeves of her blouse, to do anything that might give away the fact that her heart was racing. "How long have you been working for me?" he asked. 6 months. "And in those 6 months, have I ever given you a reason to be afraid of me?" The question caught her off guard. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, searching for the right words. The truth was complicated. Adrian Core was not a kind man. He was not warm or approachable or easy to work for. But he had never raised his voice at her. He had never made her feel small or stupid or worthless. He had never touched her. "No," she said finally. "Then why do you look at me like I might hurt you?" Her breath caught. She didn't know how to answer that, didn't know how to explain that fear had become her default setting, that she had spent so long bracing for impact that she didn't know how to stand still anymore. "I don't," she started, but he cut her off. "Show me your wrist." The air left her lungs in a rush. For a moment she couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't do anything except stand there while panic clawed its way up her throat. He couldn't know. There was no way he could know. She had been so careful. "Mr. Core?" "Your wrist, Lydia." His tone left no room for argument. Slowly, she set the tablet down on the edge of his desk and pulled back the sleeve of her left arm. The bruises were faint, yellowing now, almost gone, but they were still visible if you knew where to look. 4 distinct marks, the shape of fingers pressed too hard into soft skin. Adrian's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Something cold and sharp and dangerous. "Who did that to you?" She pulled her sleeve back down quickly, her hands trembling. "It's nothing. I'm fine." "That's not what I asked. It's personal." "I don't care." She looked up at him then, really looked at him, and saw something she hadn't expected. Anger. Not directed at her, but simmering just beneath the surface, controlled and lethal. It should have scared her. Instead, it made her feel something she hadn't felt in a long time. Seen. "It's handled," she said quietly. "It won't happen again." "You're right," Adrian said, his voice soft and deadly. "It won't." Before she could respond, he stood and walked around the desk, closing the distance between them in 2 long strides. Lydia's instinct was to step back, but she forced herself to hold her ground. He stopped just in front of her, close enough that she could see the faint scar along his jawline, the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands flexed at his sides like he was holding himself back. "What's his name?" Adrian asked. "I can't." "What's his name, Lydia?" She swallowed hard. "Marcus." "Marcus what?" "Marcus Hale." Adrian's jaw tightened, and for a second she thought he might say something else. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, typing something quickly before slipping it back into his jacket. "Go home," he said. "Pack a bag. Bring whatever matters to you." "What?" "You're not going back to him." The words hit her like a physical blow. She shook her head, her hands twisting together in front of her. "Mr. Kaur, I appreciate the concern, but you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," he said, his tone clipped. "You're living with a man who puts his hands on you. You're afraid to leave because you think he'll come after you. You're probably right, but that stops today." "You can't just—" "I can, and I am." She stared at him, her mind racing. This was insane. He was her boss, not her savior. He didn't owe her anything. And yet, the way he was looking at her, like she mattered, like she was worth protecting, made something inside her chest crack open. "I don't have anywhere to go," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You do now." 2 hours later, Lydia stood in the marble entryway of Adrian's seaside estate, a small duffel bag clutched in her hands, her entire world reduced to the few things she had managed to grab before one of Adrian's men escorted her out of the apartment she had shared with Marcus for the past 2 years. She hadn't even left a note. Part of her felt guilty about that. The other part, the part that still remembered the way Marcus's voice turned cold when he drank, the way his grip tightened when she said the wrong thing, felt nothing but relief. The estate was massive, perched on a cliff overlooking the ocean, surrounded by high walls and security cameras and men in dark suits who didn't smile. It was the kind of place that belonged in a magazine, not in her life. She didn't belong here. She didn't belong anywhere. "Miss Hart." She turned to find a woman in her 50s standing in the doorway, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, her expression polite but distant. "I'm Claire," the woman said. "I manage the house. Mr. Kaur asked me to show you to your room." "Thank you," Lydia said quietly. She followed Claire up a wide staircase, past paintings that probably cost more than her entire life, down a hallway lined with closed doors. Claire stopped at the end of the hall and opened the last door on the left, stepping aside to let Lydia enter. The room was beautiful. Soft gray walls, a massive bed with white linens, floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the ocean. There was a fireplace, a sitting area, a bathroom with a clawfoot tub that made her chest ache with something she couldn't name. "If you need anything, there's a phone on the nightstand," Claire said. "Dinner is at 7. Mr. Kaur prefers to eat in the dining room, but if you'd rather have something brought up, just let me know." Thank you." Claire nodded and left, closing the door softly behind her. Lydia stood in the middle of the room, her bag still clutched in her hands, and for the first time in 2 years, she let herself cry. Adrian didn't come home until after midnight. He found Lydia in the library, curled up in one of the oversized chairs near the fireplace, a book open in her lap. She looked up when he walked in, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. "You should be asleep," he said. I tried. He nodded and crossed to the bar in the corner, pouring himself 2 fingers of whiskey. He didn't offer her any. He had a feeling she didn't drink. Are you hungry? He asked. No. Claire said you didn't come down for dinner. I wasn't hungry then either. He took a sip of his drink, studying her over the rim of the glass. She looked smaller here, curled up in his chair, wearing an oversized sweater that swallowed her frame. Fragile. Except he knew better. Fragile things didn't survive men like Marcus Hale. Fragile things broke. I need to ask you something, he said. She closed the book and set it aside, her hands folding neatly in her lap. Okay. Do you want him dead? The question hung in the air between them, stark and brutal. Lydia's eyes widened, and for a moment she just stared at him like she wasn't sure she had heard him correctly. What? It's a simple question, Adrian said. Do you want Marcus Hale dead? No, of course not. Why not? Because that's... She stopped, shaking her head. Because that's not how the world works. Adrian smiled, but there was no warmth in it. It's exactly how my world works. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he could see the moment she understood. This wasn't a hypothetical. This wasn't some abstract conversation about justice or morality. He was offering her something real, something permanent. I don't want you to kill him, she said quietly. Then what do you want? I want him to leave me alone. That's not enough. It is for me. Adrian set his glass down on the mantel and crossed the room, stopping just in front of her chair. She tilted her head back to look at him, and he saw the fear there, but also something else. Curiosity, maybe even trust. Marcus Hale put his hands on you, Adrian said, his voice low and controlled. He hurt you. He made you afraid. And now you're sitting in my house asking me to let him walk away like that's acceptable. It's not. You don't get to decide that. I just did. Her jaw tightened, and he saw the flash of anger in her eyes. Good. Anger was better than fear. Anger meant she still had fight left in her. I didn't ask you to save me, she said. I know. Then why are you doing this? He crouched down in front of her chair, bringing himself to her eye level. She didn't flinch, didn't look away, and he respected the hell out of her for that. Because I can, he said simply. Because you deserve better than what he gave you. And because I don't like the idea of someone hurting what's mine. I'm not yours. Not yet. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Lydia's breath hitched, and he saw the way her pulse jumped in her throat. She was afraid, but not of him. She was afraid of what he was offering, afraid of what it might mean. I should go to bed, she said. Adrian stood, giving her space. Sleep well, Lydia. She stood and walked past him, pausing at the doorway. Thank you, she said softly. For today. For all of this. Don't thank me yet. She frowned, but she didn't ask what he meant. She just nodded and left, her footsteps quiet on the marble floor. Adrian poured himself another drink and stared out at the dark ocean, his mind already working through the logistics of what came next. Marcus Hale had no idea what was coming for him, but he would, soon. The next morning, Lydia woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and the sound of waves crashing against the cliffs below. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then it all came rushing back. The bruises, Adrian's office, the way he had looked at her like she was something worth protecting. She sat up slowly, her body aching in ways that had nothing to do with physical pain. There was a knock at the door. Come in, she called. Claire entered, carrying a tray with coffee, fruit, and toast. Good morning, Miss Hart. Mr. Core asked me to let you know he'll be in his office if you need anything. He also wanted me to give you this. She handed Lydia a small black card. There was no name on it, just a phone number embossed in silver. What is this? Lydia asked. A direct line, Claire said. To him. He said to call if you need anything. Anything at all. Lydia stared at the card, her chest tight. Thank you. Claire nodded and left, closing the door behind her. Lydia set the card on the nightstand and picked up the coffee, letting the warmth seep into her hands. She didn't know what she was supposed to do now. She didn't know how to exist in this strange, beautiful place where people brought her breakfast and gave her phone numbers to men who terrified and fascinated her in equal measure. She spent the morning exploring the estate, walking through the gardens, standing at the edge of the cliffs, and watching the ocean roll in and out. It was peaceful here, quiet, safe, and that scared her more than anything. By noon, she found herself standing outside Adrian's office, her hand raised to knock. She hesitated, then lowered it again. What was she even supposed to say? Thank you for rescuing me. What happens now? Are you really going to kill Marcus? Before she could decide, the door opened and Adrian stood there, his expression unreadable. Were you planning to knock, or were you just going to stand out here all day? He asked. I didn't want to interrupt. You're not. He stepped aside, and she walked into his office, taking in the massive desk, the floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, the view of the ocean that stretched out beyond the windows. It was different from his office in the city, more personal somehow. There were photographs on the shelves, a leather jacket draped over the back of a chair, a half-empty glass of water on the desk. Sit, Adrian said, gesturing to one of the chairs across from his desk. She sat, her hands folded in her lap, and waited. I'm going to ask you some questions, he said, settling into his chair, and I need you to answer them honestly. Okay. How long were you with Marcus? 2 years? How long has he been hitting you? She flinched at the bluntness of the question, but she forced herself to answer. About a year. Why didn't you leave? I tried, once. He found me. Adrian's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. Did he hurt you? Yes. Where? She looked down at her hands. Does it matter? Yes. She swallowed hard. My ribs, my face. He said if I tried to leave again, he'd make sure I couldn't walk. The silence that followed was suffocating. When she finally looked up, Adrian was staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. It wasn't pity, it was something colder, something sharper. He's not going to touch you again, Adrian said quietly. How can you be sure? Because I'm going to make sure of it. She wanted to ask how, but she was afraid of the answer. Instead, she said, What do you want from me? Nothing you're not willing to give. I don't understand. Adrian leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. You're safe here, Lydia. You can stay as long as you need to. Work for me, don't work for me, I don't care. But you're not going back to him. Ever. And if I want to leave, then you leave. Just like that? Just like that. She didn't believe him. Not entirely. Men like Adrian Corr didn't do things without expecting something in return, but she also didn't have anywhere else to go. And the idea of walking out of this house and back into her old life made her want to throw up. Okay, she said quietly. Okay. I'll stay, for now. Adrian nodded, and for the first time since she had met him, she saw something that might have been relief flicker across his face. Good, he said. Now get out of here. I have work to do. She stood, and as she reached the door, she paused. Adrian? He looked up, and she saw the faint surprise in his eyes at the sound of his name. Thank you. He didn't smile, but his voice softened just a fraction. Don't mention it. That night, Lydia couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with questions she didn't have answers to. What was Adrian planning? What would Marcus do when he realized she was gone? And why did the thought of Adrian's protection make her feel both terrified and inexplicably safe? She got out of bed and walked to the window, looking out at the dark ocean. The moon was full, casting silver light across the water, and for a moment she let herself imagine a life where she didn't have to be afraid. A life where she could wake up in the morning and not wonder if today would be the day Marcus finally went too far. A knock at the door startled her out of her thoughts. Come in, she said. The door opened and Adrian stepped inside, still dressed in the same clothes he had been wearing earlier. He looked tired, but his eyes were sharp, alert. Can't sleep? He asked. No. Me neither. He crossed the room and stood beside her at the window, his hands in his pockets. They stood in silence for a long moment, the only sound the distant crash of waves against the cliffs. I keep thinking about what you said, Lydia said quietly, about making sure Marcus doesn't touch me again. And? I'm afraid of what that means. Adrian turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. You should be. She met his gaze, and in that moment she understood. Whatever Adrian was planning, it wasn't going to be clean or simple or easy. It was going to be brutal, final. "I don't want you to become a monster because of me," she said. Adrian's lips curved into a faint, humorless smile. "Lydia, I've been a monster for a long time. You didn't make me this way." "Then what did?" "Survival." The word hung between them, and she realized they weren't so different after all. They had both learned to survive in a world that didn't give second chances. They had both built walls to keep people out, to protect themselves from the kind of pain that broke you beyond repair. "I'm not asking you to save me," she said. "I know." "Then why are you doing this?" He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch gentle despite the calluses on his fingers. "Because I want to." Her breath caught, and for a moment she forgot how to think. His hand lingered near her face, his thumb brushing against her cheek, and she saw something in his eyes that made her heart race. Not pity, not obligation. Something raw and honest and terrifying. "Adrian, go to bed, Lydia," he said, his voice rough. "Before I do something we'll both regret." She wanted to ask what he meant, but she didn't. Instead, she nodded and stepped back, putting distance between them. He turned and walked to the door, pausing with his hand on the handle. "Lock this," he said, "not because you need to, but because it might help you sleep." And then he was gone, leaving her alone in the dark with her racing heart and the lingering warmth of his touch on her skin. The days that followed fell into a strange, quiet rhythm. Lydia spent her mornings in the library, reading or simply staring out at the ocean. She spent her afternoons walking the grounds, getting to know the security team, learning the layout of the estate, and she spent her evenings with Adrian, sharing dinners that were more comfortable than they had any right to be. He didn't press her for details about her past. He didn't ask her to talk about Marcus or the bruises or the fear that still woke her up in the middle of the night. He just existed beside her, solid and steady, a presence that made her feel less alone. But she could see the darkness in him too. The way his jaw tightened when his phone rang at odd hours. The way his eyes went cold and distant when he thought she wasn't looking. The way he disappeared into his office for hours at a time, emerging with blood on his knuckles and a look in his eyes that made her chest ache. She didn't ask what he was doing. She was afraid of the answer. One evening, nearly 2 weeks after she had arrived at the estate, she found him in the library, sitting in the same chair she had occupied that first night. He had a glass of whiskey in his hand, and he looked exhausted. "Bad day?" she asked, settling into the chair across from him. "You could say that. Do you want to talk about it?" "No." She nodded and picked up the book she had left on the side table, flipping it open to the page she had marked. They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the crackle of the fire in the hearth. "He's gone," Adrian said suddenly. Lydia looked up, her heart skipping a beat. "What?" "Marcus. He's gone. You won't hear from him again." The book slipped from her hands and landed on the floor with a soft thud. She stared at Adrian, her mind struggling to process what he had just said. "What did you do?" she whispered. "What needed to be done?" "Adrian, he's not dead," Adrian said, cutting her off. "But he might as well be. He's in a place where he can't hurt you, where he can't hurt anyone." She didn't know whether to feel relieved or horrified. Part of her wanted to ask for details, to know exactly what Adrian had done. The other part didn't want to know, didn't want to carry the weight of that knowledge. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. Because you deserve to know that it's over, that you're free." Free. The word felt foreign on her tongue, like something she didn't have the right to claim. She had spent so long living in fear, so long bracing for the next blow, that she didn't know how to exist without it. "I don't know how to be free," she said quietly. Adrian set his glass down and leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "Then I'll teach you." She looked at him, this man who had taken her in, who had protected her, who had done terrible things in her name without asking for anything in return. And she realized that somewhere along the way, she had stopped being afraid of him. She had started trusting him. Maybe even more than that. "Okay," she said. "Okay? Teach me." Adrian smiled, and for the first time since she had met him, it reached his eyes. The first lesson came 3 days later, on a gray morning when the ocean looked like hammered steel and the wind rattled the windows. Lydia found Adrian in the dining room, already dressed in a dark suit, his attention fixed on a laptop screen. He looked up when she entered, his expression shifting from concentration to something softer. "You're up early," he said. "Couldn't sleep." She poured herself coffee from the silver pot on the sideboard, her hand steady, despite the nervous energy humming through her veins. "What are you working on?" "Nothing that can't wait." He closed the laptop and gestured to the chair beside him. "Sit." She did, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. The silence between them had become comfortable over the past few weeks, but this morning it felt different, charged with something she couldn't name. "I want to show you something," Adrian said. He stood and walked to the windows, looking out at the turbulent sea. "My world isn't like yours, Lydia. The rules are different. The stakes are higher. And the people in it will eat you alive if you show weakness." "I know that. Do you?" He turned to face her, his eyes hard. "Because knowing it and living it are two different things. You've spent the last 2 years surviving one man. Out there are dozens who would see you as an easy target. A way to get to me." The words sent a chill down her spine. She set her mug down carefully. "Then why are you telling me this?" "Because I need you to understand what you're stepping into, and I need you to decide if you want to be part of it." "Part of what?" "My life. My world. All of it." She stared at him, her heart pounding. This was more than protection, more than temporary shelter. He was offering her something permanent, something that would change everything. "I'm not asking you to decide right now," Adrian continued, "but if you stay, you need to be strong. You need to know how to read people, how to spot danger, how to protect yourself. I can teach you that, but only if you want to learn." Lydia stood, moving to the window beside him. The ocean churned below, violent and beautiful, and she felt something inside her respond to it, a wildness she had buried so deep she had almost forgotten it existed. "Teach me," she said. Adrian's mouth curved into a slight smile. "Get dressed. We start in an hour." The training room was in the basement, a space she hadn't known existed until Adrian led her down a narrow staircase hidden behind a panel in his office. It was sparse, padded floors, mirrors along one wall, equipment she didn't recognize. A man was waiting for them, compact and muscular, with graying hair and a scar that cut through his left eyebrow. "This is Dmitri," Adrian said. "He's going to teach you how to fight." Dmitri looked her up and down with professional detachment. "She's small. She's tougher than she looks." "We'll see." Dmitri gestured to the center of the room. "Come." Lydia glanced at Adrian, who nodded. She stepped forward, her palms sweating. "First lesson," Dmitri said. "Someone grabs your wrist. What do you do?" I don't know." "Exactly. So you learn." He reached out and caught her wrist, his grip firm, but not painful. "Most people pull away. That's instinct. But instinct gets you hurt. You want to move toward the thumb. That's the weakest point of any grip. Rotate your arm and pull down. Like this." He demonstrated slowly, and she tried to copy the movement. It felt awkward, unnatural. "Again," Dmitri said. They practiced for an hour, her wrist burning from repetition, sweat dampening her shirt. Adrian watched from the corner, his expression unreadable. When Dmitri finally called a break, Lydia's entire body was shaking. "You did well," Adrian said, handing her a bottle of water. "I feel like I'm going to throw up." "That means you're working hard enough." He tilted his head toward the stairs. "Come on. Dmitri will be back tomorrow." She followed him up to the main floor, her legs unsteady. "How long did it take you to learn all that?" "Years. But you don't need years. You just need enough to give yourself a chance." "A chance to what?" "Run, fight, survive." He paused at the top of the stairs, looking down at her. "Whatever it takes." The days blurred together after that. Mornings with Dmitri, learning holds and breaks, and how to use her size as an advantage instead of a weakness. Afternoons with Adrian, who taught her different lessons: how to read a room, how to identify the dangerous men from the merely powerful ones, how to speak with authority even when she felt like she was drowning. "Don't apologize," he told her one evening as they sat in his office, going over profiles of men he did business with. "Apologies make you sound uncertain. Say what you mean and stand by it." "What if I'm wrong?" "Then you're wrong, but you own it." He tapped a photograph on the desk, a silver-haired man with cold eyes. "This is Viktor Sokolov. He runs weapons through Eastern Europe. If he ever speaks to you, what do you do?" polite but distant. Why? Because he's dangerous, but he's useful to you. I don't want to offend him, but I don't want to seem weak either. Good. Adrian moved to the next photo. And this one? She studied the face. Younger, handsome, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. James Connolly, real estate. You don't trust him. Why not? Because you keep his file in the red folder. That means he's a problem. Adrian's expression flickered with something that might have been pride. You're learning. She was. Slowly, painfully, she was learning to navigate the treacherous waters of Adrian's world. But the more she learned, the more she realized how deep those waters ran, how many enemies he had, how much danger lived just beneath the surface of his carefully controlled empire. One night, nearly a month after she had arrived at the estate, she woke to the sound of voices downstairs. Angry voices. She slipped out of bed and crept to the top of the stairs, her heart racing. The door to Adrian's office was open, light spilling into the darkened hallway. You're making a mistake, a man said. She didn't recognize the voice. That's not your concern. Adrian's tone was ice. You think you can just take her and there won't be consequences? People are talking, Cor. Let them talk. Marcus Hale had friends. Marcus Hale was a piece of shit who got exactly what he deserved, and if any of his friends want to make an issue of it, they can come see me directly. There was a long silence. Then the other man laughed, low and bitter. You've gone soft, over a woman. Get out. Adrian, I said get out, before I throw you out. Footsteps. The front door opening and closing. Lydia pressed herself against the wall, her breath coming fast. She should go back to her room, pretend she hadn't heard anything. But before she could move, Adrian appeared at the bottom of the stairs, looking up at her. How much did you hear? He asked. Enough. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaustion written across his face. Come down here. She descended slowly, her bare feet silent on the marble. When she reached the bottom, Adrian gestured toward his office. She followed him inside, watching as he poured himself a drink. Marcus had friends? She asked quietly. Had. Past tense. He took a long swallow. They won't be a problem. Are you sure? Yes. That man said you've gone soft. Adrian's jaw tightened. That man is an idiot. Is it true? He set the glass down hard enough that she flinched. Do you think I'm soft, Lydia? No. But I think you're taking risks because of me. And I don't know if that's... Don't! He crossed the space between them in 2 strides, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. Don't apologize for existing. Don't apologize for being here. And don't ever think that protecting you makes me weak. I'm not worth all this trouble, she whispered. His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. You have no idea what you're worth. The air between them shifted, became something thick and electric. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, could see the way his pupils dilated as he looked at her. Her breath caught. Adrian. Go to bed, Lydia. It was the same thing he had said that first night, but this time it sounded different, like he was holding himself back by sheer force of will, like one wrong move would shatter whatever control he had left. She went. But she didn't sleep. The next morning, things were different. Adrian was distant, professional, treating her the way he might treat any employee. It stung more than it should have. Lydia threw herself into training with Dmitri, pushing harder than usual, until her muscles screamed and her lungs burned. Enough, Dmitri said finally. You're going to hurt yourself. I'm fine. You're angry. That's different than fine. She straightened, wiping sweat from her face. What makes you think I'm angry? Because I've been doing this for 30 years, and I know what anger looks like. He tossed her a towel. You want to tell me what's bothering you? No? Fair enough. He started wrapping his hands, preparing for the next session. But whatever it is, don't let it make you reckless. Reckless gets you killed. She knew he was right, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between her and Adrian, and she didn't know how to fix it, didn't know if she even wanted to. That evening, Adrian didn't come to dinner. Claire said he was working late, that he wouldn't be back until morning. Lydia ate alone in the vast dining room, the silence pressing down on her like a weight. When she finished, she wandered through the house, restless and uneasy. She found herself in the library standing in front of the shelves where Adrian kept his personal books. Most of them were in languages she couldn't read. Russian, German, something that looked like Arabic. But one caught her eye. A slim leather-bound volume with no title on the spine. She pulled it down and opened it, expecting a novel or maybe a collection of poetry. Instead, she found photographs. Old ones, faded and creased. A young boy with dark hair and serious eyes. A woman who might have been beautiful once, before life carved lines into her face. And a man, tall, broad-shouldered, with a cruel mouth and eyes that made Lydia's skin crawl even in a photograph. "That's my father." She spun around, nearly dropping the book. Adrian stood in the doorway, still wearing his coat, his expression unreadable. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't mean to come. It's fine." He crossed the room and took the book from her hands, looking down at the photograph. "He was a bastard. Drank too much. Hit too hard. Taught me everything I needed to know about power and how to take it. What happened to him? I killed him." The words were delivered with such casual finality that for a moment, Lydia thought she had misheard. But when she looked up at Adrian's face, she saw the truth there, cold and certain. I was 17. He came at my mother with a broken bottle, and I put a kitchen knife through his ribs." Adrian closed the book and set it on the shelf. "She died anyway, 2 weeks later. Heart attack. The doctors said it was stress, but I knew better. He killed her just as surely as if he'd done it with his own hands." Lydia's chest ached. She wanted to say something comforting, something that would ease the pain she saw flickering in his eyes. But there were no words for that kind of loss. "Is that why you helped me?" she asked quietly. "Because you saw your mother in me?" "No." He turned to face her fully. "I helped you because when I looked at you, I saw someone worth saving, that's all." "I don't feel worth saving." "I know, but you will." He moved closer, and she felt her pulse quicken. This time he didn't stop. His hand came up to her face again, but this time he didn't pull away. His fingers traced the line of her jaw, slid into her hair, and she felt herself leaning into the touch before she could stop herself. "Tell me to leave," Adrian said, his voice rough. "Why?" "Because if you don't, I'm going to kiss you. And once I start, I won't want to stop." Her breath shuddered out. She should tell him to leave, should put distance between them before this became something she couldn't take back. But when she opened her mouth, different words came out. "Then don't stop." His mouth came down on hers, and the world tilted. It wasn't gentle. It was fierce and demanding, and full of all the restraint he had been holding back for weeks. His hands tightened in her hair, and she gasped against his lips, her fingers clutching at his coat. When he finally pulled back, they were both breathing hard. "This is a bad idea," he said. "Probably." "You work for me." "Not anymore. You said I didn't have to." "Lydia, I'm staying because I want to, not because I'm afraid, not because I owe you, because I want to be here, with you." Something in his expression cracked, and he kissed her again, slower this time, but no less intense. She felt herself melting into him, all the fear and doubt and self-preservation burning away under the heat of his touch. When he lifted her, she wrapped her legs around his waist without thinking, trusting him to hold her. He carried her upstairs, his mouth never leaving hers, and kicked open the door to his bedroom. The bed was massive, covered in dark sheets that smelled like him, leather and smoke, and something indefinably masculine. He laid her down carefully, his weight settling over her, and she felt the last of her defenses crumble. "Are you sure?" he asked, his forehead resting against hers. "Yes." "If you change your mind, I won't." He kissed her throat, her collarbone, the hollow of her shoulder. His hands were everywhere, learning the shape of her, and she arched into his touch with a desperation that surprised her. She had been so numb for so long, so disconnected from her own body, that feeling this much all at once was overwhelming. "Adrian," she breathed, "I know. I've got you." And he did. He took his time, coaxing responses from her that she didn't know she was capable of, pushing her higher and higher until she shattered in his arms. When he finally followed her over the edge, she felt something inside her chest crack wide open, spilling light into places that had been dark for far too long. Afterward, they lay tangled together, her head on his chest, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her back. The silence was comfortable now, warm and heavy with satisfaction. I should probably go back to my room, she said eventually. Why? Because, I don't know. Isn't that what people do? Not in my house. His arm tightened around her. Stay. She stayed. The weeks that followed were a strange blend of normalcy and intensity. During the day, they maintained a careful distance, training sessions with Dmitri, business meetings in Adrian's office, quiet dinners where they talked about everything and nothing. But at night, when the rest of the house was asleep, Lydia would slip down the hallway to Adrian's room, and they would come together with a hunger that never seemed to diminish. He was teaching her more than just self-defense now. He was teaching her confidence, showing her that she had value beyond what she could do for other people, that she was allowed to take up space, to speak her mind, to demand respect. You're different, Claire said one morning as they worked together in the kitchen. The housekeeper had warmed to Lydia over the past weeks, treating her less like a guest and more like part of the household. Different how? Lydia asked. Stronger. You stand taller now. Look people in the eye. Claire smiled. It's good to see. Lydia felt a flush of pride. She was different. She could feel it in the way she moved through the world, in the way she no longer flinched at loud noises or sudden movements. The fear that had defined her for so long was still there. She didn't think it would ever fully disappear. But it no longer controlled her. One afternoon, Adrian called her into his office. A woman was with him, elegant and sharp-eyed, dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than Lydia used to make in a month. Lydia, this is Natasha Volkov, Adrian said. She handles my European operations. Natasha extended a hand and Lydia shook it, meeting the woman's assessing gaze without flinching. Adrian's told me about you, Natasha said. Her accent was faint, cultured. I'm curious to meet the woman who's caught his attention. I'm not that interesting, Lydia said. If Adrian thinks you are, then you are. He's not easily impressed. They sat, and Adrian poured drinks. Vodka for Natasha, whiskey for himself, nothing for Lydia. She had told him weeks ago that she didn't drink, and he had remembered without her having to remind him. We have a situation, Adrian said. Viktor Sokolov is hosting a gathering in 2 weeks, the kind where alliances are made and broken. I need to be there. And you want to bring her, Natasha said, looking at Lydia. Yes. She's not ready. She will be. Lydia's stomach clenched. What kind of gathering? The dangerous kind, Natasha said bluntly. Men like Viktor don't do casual parties. Every word, every gesture, every conversation is a negotiation. One wrong move and you could start a war. I can handle it, Lydia said, even though her heart was racing. Natasha raised an eyebrow. Can you? She can, Adrian said firmly. I'll make sure of it. After Natasha left, Lydia turned to Adrian. You really think I'm ready for this? I think you're stronger than you give yourself credit for. He stood and came around the desk, pulling her to her feet. But we have 2 weeks to prepare, so we'd better get started. The preparation was intense. Adrian drilled her on names and faces, on who could be trusted and who couldn't, on the subtle power dynamics that governed his world. Natasha returned several times, testing Lydia with rapid-fire questions and hypothetical scenarios, never satisfied until Lydia's answers were perfect. You hesitate too much, Natasha said during one particularly brutal session. In this world, hesitation reads as weakness. Make a decision and commit to it, even if it's wrong. What if I say the wrong thing to the wrong person? Then Adrian will handle it, but you're less likely to make a mistake if you stop second-guessing yourself. Lydia tried. It was hard, fighting against years of conditioning that had taught her to make herself small, to defer, to apologize. But slowly, she felt herself changing, growing into the role Adrian seemed to believe she could fill. The night before the gathering, she couldn't sleep. She lay in Adrian's bed staring at the ceiling while he worked at his desk across the room. What if I mess this up? She asked quietly. He looked up, his expression softening. You won't. You don't know that. Yes, I do. He closed his laptop and came to sit on the edge of the bed. You've come further in 2 months than most people do in years. You're smart, you're observant, and you're brave as hell, even if you don't see it yet. I'm terrified. Good. Fear keeps you sharp. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. But don't let it control you. Tomorrow night, you walk in there as my equal. Not my employee, not my guest, my partner. And anyone who doesn't see that will answer to me. She searched his face, looking for doubt, but found only certainty. Why are you doing this? Really? Because I'm tired of being alone. And because when I look at you, I see the future I want, if you'll have it. Her breath caught. This was more than attraction, more than protection. This was him offering her a place beside him, permanently. A role in his world that went beyond survival. I'll have it, she whispered. He kissed her then, slow and deep, and she felt the last of her fear dissolve. Whatever tomorrow brought, she would face it, and she wouldn't face it alone. The dress arrived the next morning, delivered in a black box with no label. Lydia opened it to find midnight blue silk that shimmered like water under light, cut in a style that was elegant without being ostentatious. When she tried it on, it fit perfectly, hugging her curves in a way that made her feel powerful rather than exposed. Claire appeared in the doorway, holding a jewelry box. Mr. Kaur asked me to bring these. Inside were diamonds, earrings, and a bracelet, delicate but clearly expensive. Lydia stared at them, her throat tight. I can't wear these, she said. Why not? Because they're... She stopped, unable to articulate the feeling. Because accepting them felt like crossing some invisible line. Because wearing them would make this real in a way she wasn't sure she was ready for. Because they're beautiful? Claire asked gently. Because you deserve beautiful things? Lydia met the older woman's eyes in the mirror. Do I? Mr. Kaur thinks so. And I've learned that when he makes up his mind about something, arguing is pointless. Claire set the box on the dresser. You've come a long way, Miss Hart. Don't let old ghosts convince you otherwise. After Claire left, Lydia stood in front of the mirror, barely recognizing the woman staring back. The dress transformed her, made her look sophisticated and controlled. The bruises were long gone. Her hair had grown longer, falling in soft waves past her shoulders. But it was her eyes that looked different, no longer haunted, no longer defeated. She put on the jewelry. The car that took them to Viktor Sokolov's estate was armored, Adrian explained during the drive. Bulletproof glass, reinforced doors, a driver who had worked for him for 15 years and carried 2 guns at all times. Lydia tried not to think about why such precautions were necessary. Remember, Adrian said, his hand resting on her knee, you don't have to impress anyone, just be yourself. Let them wonder who you are and why I brought you. And if someone asks directly, tell them the truth, that you work with me. They'll assume the rest. Which is? His mouth curved slightly. That you're mine. And that anyone who touches you answers to me. The words sent heat through her veins, but she kept her expression neutral. This was the game now, control and perception, power wrapped in silk and diamonds. Viktor Sokolov's estate made Adrian's look modest by comparison. It sprawled across what must have been 50 acres, surrounded by high walls and enough security to guard a small country. The house itself was a monument to excess. Marble columns, crystal chandeliers, artwork that probably belonged in museums. Adrian helped her out of the car, his hand settling on the small of her back as they climbed the steps. She could feel eyes on them already. Security, staff, other guests arriving. Being evaluated, measured, judged. The entrance hall was crowded with people who looked like they stepped out of magazines. Women in designer gowns, men in custom suits, everyone holding champagne glasses and wearing smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Conversations paused as Adrian entered, heads turning to track his movement through the room. Adrian Kaur, a voice boomed. I was beginning to think you wouldn't come. Viktor Sokolov was exactly as his photograph suggested, silver-haired, cold-eyed, with the kind of presence that commanded attention without effort. He approached with his hand extended, his gaze sliding from Adrian to Lydia with undisguised curiosity. Victor, Adrian said, shaking his hand, thank you for the invitation. And who is this? Victor's accent was thick, his smile predatory. Lydia Hart, Adrian said. She works with me. Does she? Victor took Lydia's hand, raising it to his lips in a gesture that was more theatrical than genuine. A pleasure, Miss Hart. I hope you find the evening entertaining. I'm sure I will, Lydia said, keeping her voice steady. Victor's eyes narrowed slightly, assessing. Then he laughed. Come, there are people you should meet. He led them deeper into the house, through rooms that showcased wealth without taste, into a parlor where a smaller group had gathered. Lydia recognized some of the faces from Adrian's files. Natasha was there, talking to a man with a scar across his cheek, a woman in red who handled arms deals in South America, two brothers who controlled the port authority. "Everyone," Victor announced. "You know Adrian, of course, and this is his companion, Miss Lydia Hart." The attention shifted to her like a spotlight, and for a moment panic threatened to claw its way up her throat. But then she felt Adrian's hand on her back, steady and warm, and she remembered Natasha's words. "Make a decision and commit." "It's nice to meet you all," she said, meeting their gazes without flinching. A woman with sharp features and calculating eyes stepped forward. "Lydia Hart. I don't believe I've heard that name before." "That's because I prefer to work quietly," Lydia said. "In what capacity?" "Whatever Adrian needs." The woman's smile was brittle. "How fortunate for him." Adrian's hand tightened slightly on Lydia's back, a silent warning to be careful. But Lydia held her ground, returning the woman's smile with one of her own. "I like to think we're fortunate for each other," she said. The woman's eyes flickered with something, respect maybe, or annoyance, and she turned away. Lydia felt tension drain from her shoulders. "Well done," Adrian murmured in her ear. The evening progressed in a blur of introductions and carefully coded conversations. Lydia stuck close to Adrian, watching the way he navigated the room, the subtle shifts in his posture and tone, depending on who he was speaking to. With Victor, he was respectful but firm. With Natasha, collegial. With the others, he maintained a careful distance, revealing nothing while extracting everything. She tried to do the same, answering questions without saying anything of substance, smiling at jokes that weren't funny, pretending the weight of so many dangerous eyes on her didn't make her want to run. "You're doing well," Natasha said during a quiet moment when Adrian was pulled aside by the Port Authority brothers. "Better than I expected. I feel like I'm drowning. Everyone does their first time. But you're holding your own. That's what matters." "How long does this usually last?" "Hours. Sometimes all night." Natasha's expression softened slightly. "Adrian wouldn't have brought you if he didn't think you could handle it. Trust that." Lydia wanted to. But as the night wore on and the alcohol flowed more freely, the atmosphere grew heavier. Conversations became louder, more aggressive. She saw money change hands, deals being made in corners, alliances forming and breaking over glasses of expensive bourbon. At one point, a man she didn't recognize cornered her near the bar. He was younger than most of the others, handsome in a way that felt manufactured, with teeth too white and cologne too strong. "You're Adrian's new pet," he said, leaning too close. Lydia stepped back, maintaining her composure. "I work with Adrian." "Right. Is that what we're calling it?" He reached out, fingers brushing her arm. "What does a position like that pay these days?" She jerked away, anger flaring hot and bright. "Don't touch me." "Or what?" His smile turned ugly. "You'll run to Adrian? Tell him the big bad man was mean to you?" Before Lydia could respond, a hand clamped down on the man's shoulder, spinning him around. Adrian's face was terrifyingly calm. "James," he said quietly, "I think you should apologize." James Connolly, Lydia recognized him now from the files, real estate and dirty money, tried to pull away, but Adrian's grip didn't loosen. "I was just making conversation," James said. "You were putting your hands on something that doesn't belong to you." Adrian's voice dropped lower. "Apologize. Now." The room had gone quiet, everyone watching. James's face flushed red, but he looked at Lydia and muttered, "Sorry." Louder. "I said, I'm sorry." Adrian released him with enough force that James stumbled. "Get out of my sight." James left, and gradually the conversations resumed, though Lydia could feel the shift in the room's energy. Adrian had just publicly claimed her, made it clear that she was under his protection. Some of the looks she received now were more wary, more respectful. Others were calculating, like people reassessing a chessboard. "Are you all right?" Adrian asked, his hand finding hers. "Yes, thank you. I should have stayed closer." "I'm fine. Really." She squeezed his hand. "But maybe we can get some air?" He led her out onto a terrace that overlooked manicured gardens lit by soft lanterns. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of jasmine and the distant sound of the ocean. Lydia breathed deeply, letting the tension drain from her body. "I'm sorry," Adrian said. "For what?" "For bringing you into this. For putting you in a position where men like James think they can. He stopped, his jaw tight. I knew this world was ugly. I just didn't think about how ugly it would look through your eyes. Adrian. She turned to face him, reaching up to touch his cheek. I chose to be here. You gave me the choice, and I made it. Don't apologize for that. You shouldn't have to deal with it. I've dealt with worse, a lot worse. She held his gaze. And unlike before, now I have someone who actually gives a damn. That makes all the difference. He pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. If anyone else touches you, you'll handle it. I know. They stood like that for a long moment, the sounds of the party muffled behind them. When they finally went back inside, Lydia felt steadier, more certain of her place at Adrian's side. The rest of the evening passed without incident. Victor made a speech about loyalty and power that was probably meant to be inspiring, but mostly sounded like a threat. More drinks were poured, more deals were made. Lydia watched it all, filing away faces and names and the small betrayals that happened in glances and whispered conversations. It was past midnight when Adrian finally said they were leaving. Lydia's feet ached in her heels, and exhaustion pulled at her bones, but she kept her expression neutral as they made their goodbyes. Victor kissed her hand again, his smile knowing. You are not what I expected, Miss Hart, he said. I get that a lot. Good. Predictable women are boring. Come back anytime. In the car, Lydia finally let herself slump against the seat, kicking off her heels with a groan. You were perfect, Adrian said. I nearly punched James Connolly in the face. I would have paid to see that. He pulled her against his side, his arm around her shoulders. But you handled it exactly right. You stood your ground, and when he pushed too far, you knew I would back you up. That's how this works. It's exhausting. It gets easier. Eventually. He pressed a kiss to her temple. But you don't have to do it again if you don't want to. Tonight was a test, and you passed. A test of what? Whether you belong in my world. Whether you can survive it. His hand found hers, fingers lacing together. You can. Anyone who saw you tonight knows it. She wanted to believe him. Part of her did. But another part, the part that remembered being small and scared and powerless, wondered what the cost of belonging would be. The answer came 3 days later, when Lydia was searching Adrian's office for a file he'd asked her to pull. She found it in the bottom drawer of his desk, buried under contracts and financial reports. But when she lifted it out, another folder came with it. Red, like the ones he kept for problems. She shouldn't have opened it. She knew that even as her fingers worked the clasp, but curiosity and something darker, suspicion, maybe, or the need to know exactly what kind of man she'd tied herself to, made her flip it open. Inside were photographs. Marcus Hale, beaten so badly his face was unrecognizable, hospital reports, police statements that had been crossed out and rewritten, and a death certificate dated 2 weeks after Lydia had moved into Adrian's estate. The folder slipped from her hands, papers scattering across the floor. She stared at them, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. Dead. Marcus was dead. Adrian had told her he was gone, that he couldn't hurt her anymore, but she had assumed— what had she assumed? That Marcus was in prison? In hiding? Scared into silence by whatever threat Adrian had made? Not that Adrian had killed him. The door opened behind her and she spun around to find Adrian standing there, his expression going from curious to resigned as he saw the papers on the floor. You lied to me, she said, her voice shaking. I didn't lie. I told you he was gone. You said he wasn't dead. I said he was in a place where he couldn't hurt you. I never said that place wasn't a grave. Adrian stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. And before you ask, yes, I killed him, personally, with my own hands. The casual admission made her stomach turn. Why? Because he put bruises on you. Because he made you afraid. Because he was a piece of shit who didn't deserve to breathe the same air as you. Adrian's eyes were hard, unapologetic. And because I wanted to, you wanted to. Yes, I wanted to watch him beg. I wanted him to feel every ounce of pain he'd ever inflicted on you. And when he finally died, I felt nothing but satisfaction. Lydia pressed a hand to her mouth, fighting the urge to be sick. This was the man she'd been sleeping with, the man she'd told herself she was falling for, a killer who felt no remorse for taking a life. Say something, Adrian said. I don't know what to say. Then ask me questions. Yell at me. Hit me if it makes you feel better. But don't just stand there looking at me like I'm a stranger. Aren't you? The words came out broken. I thought I knew you. You thought what? That I was some kind of hero? His laugh was bitter. I told you what I was, Lydia. I told you I was capable of brutality. You just didn't want to believe it. There's a difference between being capable of something and actually doing it. Not in my world. She shook her head, backing away from him. I need to think. Lydia, please, just give me some time. He didn't try to stop her as she walked past him and out of the office. She made it to her room before the tears came, hot and angry and confused. Part of her was horrified by what Adrian had done, but another part, a part she didn't want to acknowledge, felt a savage satisfaction that Marcus had suffered, that he had paid for what he'd done to her. What did that make her? She spent the rest of the day locked in her room, ignoring Claire's knock at dinner time, ignoring the soft tap that she knew was Adrian checking on her. She stared at the ceiling and tried to make sense of the tangled mess of emotions churning in her chest. Fear, anger, relief, guilt, and underneath it all, something darker that whispered, he deserved it, whispered, you're glad he's dead, whispered you would have done the same if you'd had the courage. Night fell, and still she couldn't sleep. Finally, sometime after midnight, she got out of bed and walked down the hall to Adrian's room. She didn't knock, just opened the door and found him sitting in the chair by the window, a glass of whiskey in his hand, staring out at the dark ocean. I'm not sorry, he said without turning around. I know you want me to be, but I'm not. I'd do it again. I know. And I won't apologize for protecting you, for doing what needed to be done. I'm not asking you to. He turned then, surprise flickering across his face. You're not? She crossed the room and took the glass from his hand, setting it on the side table. Then she climbed into his lap, her legs straddling his thighs, her hands framing his face. I should be horrified, she said quietly. I should be packing my bags and running as far from you as I can get. But I'm not, and that scares me more than anything you've done. Why? Because part of me is glad you killed him. Part of me wishes I could have watched. Her voice cracked. What does that make me? Human. His hand settled on her hips, holding her steady. You're allowed to be glad that the man who hurt you is gone. That doesn't make you a monster. Then what does it make me? A survivor. Someone who understands that sometimes the only way to be free is to burn the past to ash. She searched his face, looking for something. Regret, maybe, or shame. But all she saw was certainty. Adrian knew exactly what he was, and he wasn't going to pretend to be anything else. Not for her, not for anyone. And maybe that was what she needed. Not someone who would lie to make her feel better. Not someone who would hide the ugly parts of themselves to seem more palatable. But someone who would show her the truth, no matter how brutal, and let her decide if she could live with it. I'm not a good person, she whispered. Neither am I. Maybe that's why this works. She kissed him then, hard and desperate, and he responded with the same fierce intensity. His hands tightened on her hips, pulling her closer, and she felt the familiar heat building between them. But this time, it was different. This time there were no illusions, no pretense. Just two broken people choosing each other despite, or maybe because of, the darkness they carried. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. I need you to understand something, he said. I will always choose you. Over morality, over law, over anyone who tries to hurt you. That's who I am. And if you can't live with that, I can. She cut him off, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. I can live with it. Because the alternative is living without you, and I don't think I can do that anymore. Relief flooded his expression, and he kissed her again, softer this time. Then we're done talking about Marcus Hale. He's gone. He can't hurt you. That's all that matters. She nodded, and he carried her to the bed, laying her down gently. They made love slowly, carefully, like they were learning each other all over again. And when it was over and she lay curled against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, she realized something had shifted between them. The pretense was gone. The careful distance they'd maintained even in their most intimate moments had dissolved. What was left was raw and real and terrifying in its honesty. What happens now? She asked quietly. Now you decide what you want. If you want to stay in the shadows, working behind the scenes, that's fine. If you want to walk away from all of this and build a normal life somewhere else, I'll make it happen. And if I want to stay, really stay, not just as your employee or your... She hesitated, unsure what to call what they were. My partner, Adrian supplied. If you want to stay as my partner, then you need to understand what that means. It means stepping fully into this world, learning not just how to survive it, but how to navigate it, how to use it. You want me to become like you? No. I want you to become yourself, the version of you that isn't afraid anymore, that takes what she wants and doesn't apologize for it. Lydia thought about the woman she'd been 2 months ago, small and scared and convinced she deserved the pain that was inflicted on her. Then she thought about the woman she'd been tonight, standing in Viktor Sokolov's parlor wearing diamonds and holding her ground against people who had built empires on violence and greed. She knew which woman she wanted to be. Teach me, she said. Teach me everything. Adrian's smile was slow and dangerous. Are you sure? Yes. Then we start tomorrow. And Lydia? He tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his eyes. Once we start down this path, there's no going back. You need to be certain. She was. For the first time in her life, she was absolutely certain. I'm ready. The transformation didn't happen overnight. Adrian woke her before dawn the next morning, his hand gentle on her shoulder, and led her down to his office where 3 laptops were already open, screens glowing in the darkness. This is the real work, he said, gesturing to the displays. Not the parties or the handshakes. This is where power actually lives. Lydia pulled a chair beside him, studying the spreadsheets and encrypted messages that filled the screens. Numbers that didn't make sense at first, names she was starting to recognize. Transactions that moved through shell companies and offshore accounts like water through a maze. Show me, she said. He did. For hours, he walked her through the architecture of his empire, how money flowed, how information was gathered and leveraged, how loyalty was bought and maintained. It was complex and ruthless and completely fascinating. Lydia found herself asking questions, challenging assumptions, suggesting alternatives that made Adrian pause and reconsider. You're good at this, he said after she'd identified a weakness in one of his supply chains that he'd missed. I used to do financial analysis before. She didn't need to explain what before meant. Different scale, but the principles are the same. Then you're going to handle the Eastern European accounts. Natasha's been complaining she's spread too thin. I don't know if I'm ready for that. You are. And Natasha will help you. He closed the laptop and turned to face her. But that's only part of what you need to learn. The numbers are easy. It's the people that will kill you if you're not careful. Over the following weeks, Adrian introduced her to a side of his business she'd only glimpsed at Victor's party. She sat in on meetings where deals were negotiated with barely concealed threats. She watched him handle a man who'd stolen from him, not with violence, but with a cold precision that was somehow worse, systematically dismantling the man's life until he was left with nothing. She learned that power wasn't always about force. Sometimes it was about knowing exactly which pressure point would make someone break. You're different with them than you are with me, she observed one evening after a particularly tense video conference with buyers in Singapore. How so? Harder. Like you don't see them as human. Adrian considered this, pouring himself a drink. Most of them aren't. Not in any way that matters. They're assets or threats, tools or obstacles. Treating them as anything else is how you get killed. And me? What am I? He crossed the room and pulled her to her feet, his hands settling on her waist. You're the exception to every rule I've ever made. She wanted to ask what that meant, but he kissed her before she could form the words, and the question dissolved into heat and urgency. Later, when they lay tangled in his sheets, she traced the scars on his chest, old knife wounds, a bullet graze along his ribs, marks from a life lived in violence. Do you ever regret it? She asked. This life? No, not even a little? Regret is useless. It doesn't change anything. His fingers found hers lacing together. I could have been different, stayed small, stayed safe, but I would have hated every second of it. This is who I am. The only question is whether you can live with who you're becoming. Lydia thought about the woman she'd been just months ago and the woman she was now. She'd stopped flinching at sudden movements, stopped apologizing when she spoke, stopped making herself small to avoid taking up space. She'd learned to read contracts, to spot deception, to hold her ground in rooms full of dangerous men. And she'd learned that she was good at it. "I don't miss who I was before," she said quietly. "Is that wrong?" Why would it be wrong? Because that version of me was supposed to be the real one, the good one. This, she gestured vaguely at the room, at him, at the life they were building. This is supposed to be the corruption. Or maybe you were never meant to be that small, scared version. Maybe this is who you were always supposed to become, and you just needed the right circumstances to find her. The idea settled into her chest, heavy and true. She fell asleep thinking about it, and when she woke, she found Adrian already up, standing at the window with his phone pressed to his ear, his voice low and dangerous. "I don't care what he thinks he's owed. Tell him if he contacts her again, I'll personally ensure he regrets it." A pause. No. No warnings. He gets one chance to walk away. After that, he's done. He ended the call and turned to find Lydia watching him. "Problem?" she asked. "Nothing I can't handle." But his expression was tight, controlled in a way that meant he was furious. "Adrian," he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "James Connolly, the one from Victor's party. He's been asking questions about you. Where you came from, what you mean to me. Apparently he thinks if he can find leverage, he can—" He stopped, his jaw clenching. "Can what?" "Get to me through you." The words should have scared her. A month ago, they would have. But now, all she felt was a cold, clear anger. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "What I should have done at the party. Remove the problem. Kill him?" "If necessary." Lydia got out of bed, wrapping herself in his discarded shirt. "Let me handle it." Adrian's eyes narrowed. "Absolutely not." "Why? You said you were training me to navigate this world. Let me prove I can." "James Connolly is dangerous. So are you. So am I, if you've taught me anything." She crossed to him, meeting his gaze steadily. "You can't protect me from everything, Adrian. At some point, I need to be able to protect myself. This isn't about self-defense. This is about sending a message." "Then let me send it." He studied her for a long moment, and she could see the war happening behind his eyes, the instinct to shield her battling against the knowledge that she was right. Finally, he nodded. "All right. But I'm coming with you, and if things go wrong, they won't." They arranged the meeting for the next day at one of Adrian's clubs downtown, a place where he controlled every exit and every employee. James arrived late, swaggering in like he owned the place, his smile faltering slightly when he saw Lydia sitting at the bar instead of Adrian. "Where's your boss?" he asked, sliding onto the stool beside her. "He's not my boss." Lydia sipped her water, keeping her voice level. "And he's around. But I wanted to talk to you first." "About?" "About you asking questions that don't concern you." James laughed, but there was an edge to it. "Everything concerns me when it comes to business. And you, sweetheart, are definitely business." "See, that's your mistake, thinking I'm a transaction instead of a person." She set down her glass and turned to face him fully. "Let me be clear. You don't get to ask about me. You don't get to speculate about my relationship with Adrian. And you definitely don't get to touch me or speak to me the way you did at Victor's. Are we understood? Or what? You'll tell Adrian and he'll come after me?" James leaned closer, his cologne overwhelming. "I'm not scared of him. You should be. But that's not the point." Lydia reached into her purse and pulled out a folder, sliding it across the bar. "The point is that I know about the properties you're flipping in the warehouse district, the ones you're using to launder money for the Moretti family, and I know the Morettis have no idea you're skimming 20% off the top." James's face went pale. "You're bluffing. Am I? There's a spreadsheet in that folder, your real numbers versus what you're reporting, bank statements showing where that money's going, and a letter ready to be delivered to Vincent Moretti explaining exactly how much you've stolen from him." "You can't." "I can, and I will, unless you agree to two things." She held up a finger. "One, you never speak to me, about me, or in my general direction ever again. 2, you stop asking questions about Adrian's business, because the next person who comes asking won't be as generous as I'm being right now." James stared at her, then at the folder, his hand shaking slightly as he opened it. She watched him read through the documents, saw the exact moment he realized she wasn't bluffing. When he looked up, the cocky swagger was gone. How did you— It doesn't matter how. What matters is that you understand I'm not someone you can push around. I'm not a weakness you can exploit. I'm the person who will destroy you if you make the mistake of trying. She stood, smoothing down her skirt. Do we have an agreement? Yes, he said quietly. Good. You can keep that folder. Consider it a reminder. She walked away, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. She made it to the back hallway before her knees went weak, and she had to brace herself against the wall. Adrian appeared a moment later, his expression unreadable. You were listening, she said. Of course I was. He pulled her into his arms, and she felt some of the adrenaline drain away. You were perfect, cold, controlled, devastating. He'll never bother you again. I thought I was going to throw up. But you didn't. You held your ground and you won. That's what matters. She pulled back to look at him. Where did you get those documents? I've had people watching James for weeks. After what happened at Victor's, I wanted to know everything about him. His mouth curved slightly. I was planning to use it myself, but your way was better, more elegant. And if he'd refused, then I would have stepped in. But I knew he wouldn't. Men like James are cowards at their core. They only push people they think won't push back. Lydia thought about that as they drove home, watching the city lights blur past the window. She'd spent so long being the person who didn't push back, who absorbed every blow and stayed quiet. But that version of herself felt like a stranger now, someone she'd shed like old skin. The weeks that followed brought a new rhythm to her life. She took over the Eastern European accounts as Adrian had promised, working closely with Natasha to understand the nuances of those markets. She attended more gatherings, more meetings, each one building her reputation as someone who belonged at Adrian's side. And slowly, grudgingly, the people in his world began to accept her. Not everyone was pleased about it. There were whispers, speculation about who she really was and what she meant to Adrian. Some saw her as a weakness, a soft spot they could exploit. Others saw her as a threat, someone who had too much influence over a man who'd always stood alone. Let them talk, Adrian said when she mentioned it. Talk is cheap. What matters is what you do. What she did was learn. She learned the difference between allies and assets, between loyalty bought with money and loyalty earned through respect. She learned how to negotiate, how to threaten without raising her voice, how to walk away from a bad deal before it became a disaster. And she learned that power wasn't something you were given. It was something you took. 2 months after her confrontation with James Connolly, Viktor Sokolov called Adrian with an invitation. Not to a party this time, but to a private dinner. Just Viktor, Adrian, and their respective partners. He wants to see you again, Adrian said. See if you were a fluke or if you're the real thing. And if I'm not, then he'll try to use you against me. But you are, so it won't matter. The dinner was held at Victor's estate, but in a smaller, more intimate setting than the last gathering. Just the 4 of them around a table that could have seated 20, served by silent staff who appeared and disappeared like ghosts. Victor's partner was a woman named Katerina, beautiful and sharp-eyed, who watched Lydia with the kind of assessment that felt like being weighed and measured. So, Victor said after the first course was cleared, tell me, Miss Hart, how are you finding your new position? Challenging, Lydia said, but rewarding. I'm sure. Adrian is not an easy man to work for. I don't work for him anymore. I work with him. Victor's eyebrows rose. A partnership, then. How modern. It's practical, Adrian said. Lydia has skills I need. I'd be a fool not to use them. And what skills are those? Katerina asked. Her accent was thicker than Victor's, her English precise but formal. Lydia met her gaze. Financial analysis, contract negotiation, risk assessment. I'm also learning logistics and supply chain management. Impressive. And here I thought you were just— Katerina paused delicately. Decorative. Adrian's hand tightened on his fork, but Lydia touched his arm lightly, a silent signal to let her handle it. I can be decorative when the situation calls for it, she said calmly, but I prefer to be useful. Decoration fades. Usefulness endures. Katerina's mouth curved into something that might have been a smile. Well said. The conversation moved to business after that, Discussions of shipping routes and tariffs and political instability in regions Lydia was still learning about. She listened more than she spoke, filing away information, connecting pieces in her mind. When she did contribute, it was with questions that showed she was paying attention, that she understood the implications of what was being discussed. Victor noticed. Could see it in the way he started directing comments to her, testing her knowledge, seeing how she'd respond. By the end of the evening, he was treating her less like Adrian's companion and more like an equal participant in the conversation. "You've done well with her," Victor said to Adrian as they moved to the parlor for after-dinner drinks. "She's nothing like I expected." "What did you expect?" Lydia asked before Adrian could respond. Victor smiled. "Someone temporary, a distraction. But you're not that, are you?" "No." "Good. Adrian needs someone who can match him, someone who won't break under pressure." He raised his glass in a small salute. "Welcome to the business, Miss Hart." It felt like a victory, small but significant. On the drive home, Adrian was quiet, his hand resting on her thigh, his thumb tracing absent patterns through the fabric of her dress. "You were brilliant tonight," he said finally. "I just answered questions." "You did more than that. You made Victor respect you. That's not easy to do." "Katerina still thinks I'm sleeping my way to the top." "Katerina thinks that about every woman in this world. It's easier for her to believe success comes from sex than skill." He glanced at her. "But she'll learn. They all will." Lydia wanted to believe that, but she also knew that some people would never see her as anything more than Adrian's weakness, no matter how much she proved herself. The thought bothered her less than it once would have. The real test came a week later when Adrian was called away on unexpected business in Moscow. He'd be gone for 5 days, leaving Lydia to handle things in his absence. It was the first time she'd been fully in charge, and she felt the weight of it settle on her shoulders like a physical thing. "You'll be fine," he said as he packed. "Natasha will be available if you need her, and Dmitri is here if there's trouble, but you won't need either of them." "What if something goes wrong?" "Then you handle it, the same way you handled James Connolly." He zipped his bag and turned to face her. "I trust you, Lydia. You need to start trusting yourself." The first 3 days went smoothly. She handled routine business, signed off on shipments, dealt with a minor contract dispute with a supplier in Prague. But on the 4th day, one of Adrian's contacts called with a problem. A shipment had been seized at the border, and the customs official who'd been paid to look the other way was suddenly demanding triple his usual fee. "Tell him no," Lydia said. "With respect, Miss Hart, if we don't pay, the shipment is lost. That's $2 million worth of—" "I know what it's worth. Tell him no. And tell him if he wants to renegotiate terms, he can do it with me directly." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "You want to speak with him yourself?" "Yes. Set up a call for this evening." The man on the other end sounded doubtful, but he agreed. 3 hours later, Lydia found herself on a video conference with a middle-aged customs official who looked both nervous and greedy. She'd done her research in the meantime, pulling up everything Adrian had on file about him. It wasn't much, but it was enough. "Mr. Kozlov," she said, keeping her voice pleasant, "I understand there's been a misunderstanding about our arrangement." "No misunderstanding. Prices have gone up. If you want your shipment released, you pay the new rate." "That's not how contracts work." "We had an agreement." "Agreements change." "They do, but not unilaterally." She leaned forward slightly. "I'm going to make you a counteroffer. You release the shipment at the original rate, and I don't tell your superior about the beach house you bought last month, the one that cost significantly more than your government salary could possibly cover." Kozlov's face went red. "You can't prove—" "I can. I have the purchase documents, the wire transfers, everything. And I have contacts in your government who would be very interested to know where that money came from." She paused, letting that sink in. "Or we can continue our arrangement as originally agreed. Your choice." The silence stretched for a long moment. Then Kozlov nodded stiffly. "The original rate is acceptable." "Good. I'm glad we could reach an understanding." She ended the call and sat back, her hands shaking slightly. When Adrian called that night to check in, she told him what had happened. "You threatened a government official?" He sounded amused rather than concerned. "Was I not supposed to?" "No, you did exactly right. Kozlov's been a problem for months, always pushing for more money. He needed to know there are consequences." There was pride in his voice. How did you find out about the beach house? I went through your files on him. You had notes about unexplained income. I just followed the thread. You're a natural at this. Or I've had a good teacher. When Adrian returned from Moscow 2 days later, Lydia met him at the door. He dropped his bag and pulled her into his arms, kissing her hard enough to make her breathless. I missed you, he said against her mouth. I missed you too. Natasha called. She said you handled the Kozlov situation perfectly. Also that you terrified one of our suppliers in Budapest into accepting terms he'd been resisting for weeks. He was being unreasonable. Adrian laughed, the sound warm and genuine. You're going to be running this place before I know it. I doubt that. I don't. He pulled back to look at her, his expression serious. I have something for you. He led her to his office and opened the safe, pulling out a leather folder. Inside were legal documents, pages of dense text that Lydia scanned quickly, her heart starting to pound as she realized what she was looking at. These are partnership papers. Real ones. Legally binding. 50% of everything I own. He watched her face carefully. I was going to wait, but after this week I realized there's no point. You've earned this. You've proven you can handle it, and I want you to have it. Adrian, I can't. You can. And you will. He took her hands. I don't want you here because you need me. I want you here because you choose to be, and that choice means something more when you have real stake in what we're building. Lydia looked down at the documents, her vision blurring slightly. This was more than money or power. This was Adrian offering her complete equality, making her not just his partner in private, but in every way that mattered. Are you sure? She asked. I've never been more sure of anything. She signed the papers with a hand that only trembled slightly, and when it was done, Adrian pulled her close and kissed her like she was the most precious thing in his world. That night, they celebrated in the only way that made sense, tangled together in his bed, learning each other's bodies all over again with a new intensity. When it was over and she lay against his chest, listening to his heartbeat slow, she felt something settle into place inside her. A sense of belonging that had nothing to do with fear or obligation and everything to do with choice. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For seeing who I could be, even when I couldn't see it myself. His arms tightened around her. You would have found your way eventually. I just helped you get there faster. Maybe that was true. Or maybe without him she would have stayed small and scared for the rest of her life. She didn't know, and it didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that she was here now, whole and strong and free, in ways she'd never imagined possible. The past was ash, and the future belonged to them both. The real challenge came 6 weeks after Lydia signed the partnership papers, when Viktor Sokolov called with an invitation that was more summons than request. He was hosting what he called a summit, the major players in their world gathering to discuss territory, resources, and the delicate balance of power that kept them all from tearing each other apart. Adrian was expected to attend, and so was Lydia. This is different from the party, Adrian explained as they prepared. That was social. This is business, real business, the kind where fortunes are made and people disappear if they say the wrong thing. You're trying to scare me. I'm trying to make sure you understand what you're walking into. He adjusted his cufflinks, his expression serious. These people will test you. They'll push to see if you break. And if they smell weakness, they'll use it. Then I won't give them anything to use. She wore black this time, a dress that was elegant but severe, her hair pulled back in a way that made her look older, more authoritative. The diamonds Adrian had given her that first night glittered at her ears and throat, but she'd added something new, a watch he'd had made for her, platinum and sapphire, expensive enough to make a statement. The summit was held at a private estate in the mountains, isolated and heavily guarded. When their car pulled through the gates, Lydia counted at least a dozen security personnel, all armed, all watching with the kind of vigilance that made her stomach clench. Stay close to me, Adrian said as they climbed the steps. And remember, you don't owe anyone explanations. You're here because you belong here. The main hall was already crowded when they entered. Lydia recognized some of the faces, Victor and Katerina, Natasha speaking with the Moretti brothers. Others she'd seen in photographs or heard mentioned in passing. But there were new faces too, people she didn't know, all of them turning to watch as she and Adrian walked in. Adrian Core, a voice boomed, and the mysterious Miss Hart. We've been eager to meet you properly. The speaker was a massive man, easily 6.5 feet tall, with a shaved head and a scar that ran from his temple to his jaw. Lydia recognized him from the files. Alexander Petrov, Russian arms dealer, notoriously volatile. "Mr. Petrov," Lydia said, extending her hand, "the pleasure is mine." He took her hand but didn't shake it, just held it while he studied her face. "You're smaller than I expected. Prettier, too. Is that relevant to why we're here?" Alexander laughed, a sound like grinding gravel. "I like her. She has teeth." He finally released her hand and clapped Adrian on the shoulder hard enough to stagger most men. "You've done well for yourself, Cor. Let's hope she's as smart as she is sharp." They moved deeper into the room, and Lydia felt the weight of every gaze that followed them. Adrian introduced her to people she'd only known as names in files, arms dealers and smugglers, politicians who'd been bought and paid for, businessmen whose legitimate enterprises were covers for much darker work. Each handshake, each polite exchange felt like a test she couldn't afford to fail. Victor eventually called everyone to order, leading them into a conference room where a massive table dominated the space. Adrian took a seat near the head, and Lydia sat beside him, acutely aware that she was one of only 3 women in the room. The others were Natasha and a woman named Elena, who controlled most of the drug trade through South America. "Thank you all for coming," Victor said once everyone was settled. "We have much to discuss. The situation in the Balkans has become unstable. The new government is making noise about cracking down on our operations. We need to decide how to respond." The conversation that followed was brutal in its efficiency. These people didn't waste time with pleasantries or diplomacy. They stated their positions, defended their interests, and pushed back hard when anyone challenged them. Lydia listened carefully, tracking the shifting alliances in the room, noting who deferred to whom and where the real power lay. When the discussion turned to supply routes through Eastern Europe, her territory now, Adrian glanced at her, a silent invitation to speak. Her heart hammered, but she kept her voice steady. "If I may," she said, and the room went quiet. "The problem isn't the new government, it's that we've been using the same routes for 3 years. They're predictable, which makes them vulnerable. I've been working with our contacts in Poland and Romania on alternatives. We can shift operations to secondary routes that are less monitored. It'll add time and cost in the short term, but it reduces exposure significantly." Alexander leaned forward. "And you trust these contacts? Polish and Romanian networks are notoriously unreliable. I've verified their capabilities personally. They've moved smaller shipments for us over the past month without incident. The infrastructure is solid." "At what cost?" She named a figure, watching his eyes narrow. "It's higher than our current rates, but factor in the risk of seizure and it's actually more cost-effective." "She makes a good point," Victor said. "What do you think, Cor?" Adrian's expression remained neutral, giving nothing away. "I trust Lydia's assessment. If she says the routes are viable, they are." It wasn't quite an endorsement, more a statement of fact. But it was enough. The room accepted her position without further argument, and the discussion moved on. Lydia felt tension drain from her shoulders. The meeting lasted for hours, breaking only for lunch, and then resuming with the same intensity. By the time Victor called for a recess, Lydia's head was spinning with information. Deals made, territories carved up, problems solved with a combination of money and barely veiled threats. She found herself on the terrace, breathing in cold mountain air, when Natasha joined her. "You did well in there," the older woman said. "I barely said anything." "Exactly. You spoke when you had something to contribute, and you backed it up with facts. That's more than most people manage their first time." Natasha lit a cigarette, offering one to Lydia, who declined. "They're still deciding what to make of you." "And what should they make of me?" "Someone who isn't going anywhere. Someone who's earned her place at that table." Natasha exhaled smoke into the twilight. "Adrian's made you a full partner. That means something, but it also means you're a target now. Not just his weakness, but a threat in your own right." "I can handle it." "I know you can. I'm just making sure you know what you've signed up for." She flicked ash over the railing. "This life doesn't give you the option of going back. Once you're in, you're in. The only way out is in a box." Lydia thought about that, about the finality of the choice she'd made. There was no returning to who she'd been before. That woman was gone, erased as completely as Marcus Hale. What remained was someone harder, sharper, more dangerous. I'm not looking for a way out, she said. Natasha smiled. Good. Then let's get back in there and finish this. The evening session was more contentious. A dispute had arisen between the Moretti brothers and Elena over distribution rights in Miami. Voices rose, threats were made thinly veiled as suggestions, and Lydia watched the room polarize into factions. Adrian remained carefully neutral, which she understood was strategic. Taking sides would cost him alliances he couldn't afford to lose. But when Vincent Moretti accused Elena of undermining their agreement, and Elena responded by suggesting the Morettis were too incompetent to hold their territory, things escalated quickly. Vincent stood, his face flushed with anger, and his brother Marco put a hand on his arm in warning. Sit down, Vincent, Victor said calmly. We're not doing this here. She's calling us incompetent. I'm calling you exactly what you are, Elena said, her voice icy. You've lost 3 shipments in 2 months because you can't manage your own people. That's not my problem. It becomes your problem when you're trying to move into our territory. Enough! Adrian's voice cut through the argument, quiet but commanding. The room fell silent. This isn't productive. Vincent, you've had security issues. That's fact, not insult. Elena, you've been expanding into areas that were previously agreed to be Moretti territory. Also fact. The question is whether we're going to solve this like professionals or like children. Vincent glared at him. What do you suggest? A neutral review of the distribution network. Someone both sides trust to assess the situation and make recommendations. Adrian paused. I'm willing to take it on. Or Lydia can, if you prefer someone less connected to existing arrangements. Lydia's stomach dropped, but she kept her face carefully blank. This was a test. Adrian was giving her the opportunity to prove herself, but also exposing her to risk. If she failed, if either side felt she'd favored the other, she'd make powerful enemies. I'll do it, she said before she could second-guess herself. Elena's eyes narrowed. No offense, Miss Hart, but you've been in this business for what, 3 months? Why should we trust your assessment? Because I have no stake in the outcome. I don't care who controls Miami. I care about efficiency and profit. If the current arrangement isn't working, I'll tell you why and how to fix it. If it is working and the problem is something else, I'll tell you that too. She met Elena's gaze steadily. I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to make money. Same as everyone else in this room. A beat of silence, then Vincent nodded slowly. All right, I'll agree to that. Elena considered for a moment longer, then shrugged. Fine, but I want the review completed within 2 weeks. You'll have it in 1, Lydia said. After the meeting concluded and people began to disperse, Adrian pulled her aside, his expression unreadable. That was either very brave or very stupid, he said. Which do you think it was? Both? But there was approval in his eyes. You just committed to solving a problem that's been festering for months. If you succeed, you'll have the respect of 2 of the most powerful families in this room. If you fail, I won't fail. How can you be sure? Because you'll help me. And because I'm not going to let Vincent Moretti or Elena, whoever she is, intimidate me into making a mistake. Adrian smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made her heart race. You're extraordinary. You know that? I'm terrified. I know, but you didn't let them see it. That's what matters. They stayed at the estate that night, along with most of the other attendees. Lydia barely slept, her mind racing through scenarios and strategies for the Miami review. When she finally dozed off just before dawn, it was to dreams of spreadsheets and shipping manifests and angry men with guns. She woke to find Adrian already up, working at the desk in their room. He looked tired, but focused, and when he saw she was awake, he gestured her over. I've been pulling files on the Miami situation, he said. You're going to need context before you start. For the next several hours, he walked her through everything he knew. The history of the Moretti family's operations, Elena's expansion over the past year, the specific shipments that had been lost and under what circumstances. It was a tangled mess of competing interests and unclear communication, made worse by pride and territorial instinct. The problem is that both sides think they're right, Adrian said. And in a way, they both are. The Morettis have historical claim to the territory, but they've been sloppy. Elena's more efficient, but she's overstepping boundaries that were agreed to years ago. So what's the solution? That's what you need to figure out. He closed the laptop and looked at her seriously. And whatever you decide, you need to sell it so well that both sides accept it. Otherwise, this turns into a war, and wars are bad for business. No pressure. You can do this. I wouldn't have offered if I didn't believe that. She spent the flight home sketching out an approach, and the following week was a blur of phone calls, meetings, and late nights poring over financial records. She spoke with Vincent and Marco Moretti, who were defensive but ultimately forthcoming once they realized she was genuinely trying to understand the situation. Elena was harder to read, more guarded, but Lydia earned a grudging respect by asking questions that demonstrated she'd done her homework. The picture that emerged was exactly what Adrian had suggested. Both sides had legitimate grievances, but the real problem was that the existing agreement hadn't accounted for the growth in demand. Miami had become more valuable, and the old territorial boundaries no longer made sense. Lydia worked with Natasha to develop a proposal that would redistribute the territory based on capability rather than history, giving the Morettis the northern routes where their infrastructure was strongest, and ceding the southern expansion to Elena. It wasn't perfectly fair to either side, but it was logical, and she backed it up with projections showing that both parties would make more money under the new arrangement than they were making now. When she presented her findings on a video conference with both families and Adrian, Victor, and several others as observers, she felt like she was standing on a cliff edge. One wrong word, and she'd lose both of them. After reviewing the situation, she began, I've concluded that the current dispute isn't about incompetence or overreach. It's about an outdated framework trying to accommodate a changed reality. Miami's market has grown by 40% in the last 18 months. The existing territorial division was designed for a smaller operation, and it's no longer efficient. She walked them through her analysis, showing where the Morettis' losses had occurred and why. Not because of poor security, but because they were trying to cover too much ground with insufficient resources. Then she showed where Elena's expansion had created redundancies and inefficiencies. My recommendation is a restructured division of territory based on infrastructure capacity, she continued, bringing up a map. The Morettis maintain control of the northern ports and distribution networks, where they have established relationships and reliable personnel. Elena takes the southern expansion, which aligns with her existing routes through the Caribbean. Both operations scale to their strengths, and the overlap that's been causing friction is eliminated. She outlined the financial projections, showed how both parties would benefit, and then sat back and waited. Vincent spoke first. You're asking us to give up half our territory. I'm asking you to trade territory you can't adequately manage for increased profit in the territory you can. Under this plan, your revenue increases by 30% within 6 months. And you trust these numbers? Marco asked. I built them from your own financial data. The numbers don't lie. Elena was studying the map, her expression thoughtful. What about expansion beyond what's outlined here? That would need to be negotiated separately, but this framework establishes clear boundaries and responsibilities. Future expansion can be discussed once the current situation stabilizes. There was a long silence. Then Vincent and Marco exchanged a look, some unspoken communication passing between them. We'll agree to this, Vincent said finally, on a trial basis. 6 months. If the numbers work out the way you're projecting, we'll make it permanent. Elena nodded. I can work with that. Relief flooded through Lydia, but she kept her expression professional. I'll draw up the formal agreement and send it to both parties by end of week. After the call ended, Adrian pulled her into his arms, kissing her hard. You did it, he said. You actually did it. Was there doubt? There's always doubt. But you exceeded every expectation. He pulled back to look at her, pride evident in his expression. Victor called me during the presentation. He wants to discuss expanding our partnership, and the Morettis asked if you'd be willing to consult on their operations in Chicago. What did you tell them? That I'd ask you. This is your decision now, Lydia. You're not just my partner anymore. You're a force in your own right. The weight of that settled over her, heavier than she'd expected. She thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago, hiding bruises and flinching at shadows. That woman would never have believed she could end up here, negotiating deals between crime families, earning the respect of people who built empires on violence and cunning. I want to take the Chicago job, she said, but I need you to promise me something. What? Don't protect me from the hard parts anymore. If there's danger, if there's risk, I need to know. I need to face it. I can't be your equal if you're still treating me like I might break. Adrian studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right. No more protection. We're partners in everything. Everything. The Chicago job took her away from the estate for 2 weeks, and it was harder than anything she'd done before. The Moretti's operations were a mess. Disorganized, inefficient, hemorrhaging money through a combination of poor planning and outright theft from within their own organization. Lydia worked 18-hour days, untangling the chaos, identifying the problems, and implementing solutions that were met with resistance at every turn. One of Vincent's lieutenants, a man named Sal, who'd been running the Chicago operation for years, took particular offense to her presence. "You think you can just walk in here and tell us how to run our business?" he said during a meeting that had already lasted 3 hours. "You don't know shit about this city." "You're right," Lydia said calmly. "I don't know Chicago, but I know numbers, and your numbers are terrible. You're losing money on routes that should be profitable, and you're paying people who aren't doing their jobs. Either you want to fix it or you don't, but don't waste my time pretending the problem doesn't exist." Sal's face flushed red. "You've got a mouth on you, lady. And you've got a leak in your distribution network that's costing the family $200,000 a month. Would you like me to tell you who it is, or would you rather keep posturing?" The room went silent. Sal stared at her, and Lydia held his gaze without flinching. Finally, Marco Moretti, who'd been observing quietly, spoke up. "Tell us." She laid out the evidence she'd gathered: shipping manifests that didn't match inventory, payments to a distributor who didn't exist, money that had been systematically siphoned off over the past year. The trail led directly to one of Sal's most trusted people, a man who'd been with the family for a decade. "You're sure about this?" Marco asked. "Completely." Sal looked like he'd been punched in the gut. "Tony? You're saying Tony's been stealing from us?" "I'm saying the evidence points to him. What you do with that information is up to you." What they did was have Tony picked up that night. Lydia didn't ask what happened to him afterward, and they didn't volunteer the information. By the end of the second week, she'd restructured their entire operation, implemented new tracking systems, and identified 3 more areas where efficiency could be improved. When she returned to the estate, exhausted and running on fumes, Adrian was waiting for her. He took one look at her face and pulled her into his arms. "That bad?" he asked. "That good. I fixed it. All of it." She buried her face in his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of him. "And I'm never doing that again." He laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest. "Yes, you are. The Morettis called. They want you to look at their operations in 3 other cities." "Absolutely not. I told them you'd think about it." She pulled back to glare at him. "You told them what?" "That you'd think about it, because you're brilliant at this, and they know it, and they're willing to pay extremely well for your time." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "But it's your choice. You can take the jobs, or you can tell them no. I'll support whatever you decide." Lydia thought about it, about the exhaustion and frustration, but also about the satisfaction of solving problems that had seemed unsolvable, about the respect she'd earned, not because of Adrian, but because of her own skill and determination. "I'll think about it," she said finally. "That's my girl." The months that followed brought a rhythm to their life that felt almost normal, despite the circumstances. Lydia took on more consulting work, building a reputation as someone who could fix broken operations and mediate disputes. Adrian continued to expand his empire, but now he did it with her at his side, making decisions together, planning strategy together, building something that belonged to both of them equally. They still had enemies. There were still threats, still moments when danger felt close enough to touch. But Lydia had learned to navigate that world with the same skill she brought to everything else. She knew when to push and when to retreat, when to show strength and when to show mercy. One evening, nearly a year after she'd first walked into Adrian's office, with bruises hidden under her sleeves, they stood on the cliffs behind the estate, watching the sun set over the ocean. The air was cool, carrying the salt smell of the sea, and Lydia felt something settle inside her, a peace she'd never expected to find. "Do you ever miss it?" Adrian asked. "The life you had before?" "No, that wasn't living. That was just surviving." She leaned against him, his arm coming around her shoulders. "This is living. Even the dangerous parts?" "Especially the dangerous parts. They remind me I'm not helpless anymore, that I have choices." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "You always had choices. You just didn't know it. Maybe. But I know it now." She turned to face him, taking his hands in hers. "I'm not the woman you saved anymore, Adrian. I'm the woman who saved herself. You just showed me how. His expression softened in a way she rarely saw, vulnerability breaking through the carefully maintained control. You saved me too. You know that, right? I was so focused on building power, on being untouchable, that I forgot what it was like to actually live. You reminded me. They stood like that as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and gold. Behind them, the estate rose like a fortress, a monument to everything they'd built together. Ahead, the ocean stretched endlessly, full of possibility and promise. Lydia thought about the journey that had brought her here, through pain and fear, through transformation and revelation, through the slow, difficult work of becoming someone new. She thought about Marcus Hale, dead and buried, his memory holding no more power over her. She thought about the scared woman she'd been, and the confident partner she'd become. "What are you thinking about?" Adrian asked. "Everything. Nothing. The future." "And what does the future look like?" She smiled, turning to kiss him softly. "Like this. Exactly like this." They walked back to the house hand in hand, and as they crossed the threshold, Lydia felt the last ghost of her past finally dissolve. She wasn't running anymore. She wasn't hiding. She was exactly where she belonged, with the man who'd seen her potential when she couldn't see it herself, building an empire that belonged to them both. The woman who'd once lived in fear was gone, replaced by someone stronger, sharper, more dangerous. Someone who knew her worth and refused to settle for less. Someone who'd learned that sometimes the only way to find yourself was to burn down everything you'd been told you were supposed to be and build something new from the ashes. And as the door closed behind them, shutting out the wind and the sound of the waves, Lydia realized she wouldn't change a single thing. Not the pain that had brought her here, not the darkness she'd walked through, not even the terrible choices that had freed her, because all of it, every scar, every lesson, every moment of terror and triumph, had led to this. To a life lived on her own terms, with a man who was her equal in every way that mattered. To power earned rather than given, respect demanded rather than begged for. She'd started this journey as prey. She'd ended it as a predator, and she'd never felt more alive.